certificates. So I'm pleased to welcome Dawn Briskey, Vice President of Client Services for orgSource. And with over 25 years experience, Dawn brings best practices in association management, a business analyst mindset, and strategic thinking skills to every engagement. Dawn has helped equip associations large and small with the tools to work remotely, and those associations have been extremely successful. So please welcome Dawn.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. As Kevin mentioned, I have experience moving organizations to working remotely. And for the last 5 years, while I've been a consultant with orgSource, all of my work has been remote. So prior to that, when I worked with the American Society for Surgery of the Hand, our leader was an innovator, and I'm not exaggerating to say it's for the last 20 years I've had the tools available to work remotely. So let's get started with today's presentation. Let's start with a poll so I can get a sense of where everybody is at in terms of working remotely. What's your organization's level of preparedness for virtual work? If you could just let us know, have you never considered it until now? Do you have some tools for staff who travel, but not everyone? Can most of your staff work remotely, or can staff do everything remotely? So if you can just select one of those options. Great, we'll wait for just a couple more answers and then we'll share the results. Okay, so it looks like we're in a pretty good position today on this call. A few of you have never considered working remotely. Some of you have some tools in place. Some of you, the majority of you, almost half, most staff can work remotely, at least most of their work. And then we have a few who can do everything remotely. So great. So in today's presentation, we're going to go through assessing your readiness to support a remote workforce. And so for some of those of you who are further along, some of this will be relevant and perhaps you'll pick up some new ideas as well. After we do that, we're going to talk about a gap analysis, talking about now that you know where you're at, where do you want to be and how can you get there? We've prepared some excellent tools for you and options for filling in some of those gaps for remote work. And then we've put together some pro tips for mastering working from home, both from a manager perspective and an employee perspective. And then finally, we have some resources on getting assistance. So as you know, running an organization involves technology, culture, people, systems. And if we were to talk about all of those aspects on today's call, it would extend for several hours. So we're primarily going to focus on technology today, although as you realize, it's pretty impossible not to consider some of those other factors as well. This is what it looked like to work from home in the 1970s. I know this because my mom worked from home in the 1970s, and these are the tools she had. That typewriter with no erase key, and then that little machine that would play the tapes that were dictated to her. An envelope arrived at our door every day at 3 in the afternoon with all her work, and at 9 o'clock the next morning, she sent it back off and it was picked up. And so I went to sleep every night hearing the sound of the typewriter playing. This is what my workspace looks like today. You don't have to be as fancy as this with 3 screens, but this is what works for me. So let's look at assessing your technology. First of all, who's going to do that assessment for you? If you're just starting out, you have a couple options. The one that we have found at orgSource to be most effective is creating a digital task force. So that's identifying a small team of staff who can assess the environment, look at the options available, recommend solutions, develop policies, and make decisions. And on that team, it's really important that you don't have your naysayers. You don't want to invite to that team necessarily the people who say it can't be done, although it's helpful to get everybody's perspective. You want people who believe that we can move forward, we can make this work, and we can be successful. The other option is that you or another staff person does the assessment. But that's going to be your first part. Decide who's going to do it and how much power they have in making decisions. So let's look at your workstations. Is this what your office looks like? Maybe you have a slightly better monitor, but are you mostly working with workstations that limit you to working at your desk? Or do you have laptops for your staff? Maybe you have a combination. Maybe you have some laptops available to go with staff who travel, and then the rest of your office has desktops. Whatever you have, make note of that and see what tools you have available to you now. In terms of phones, I think this is the phone I used when I first started working in associations 20-some years ago. So if your phone looks like that and it's an analog phone, you have some limitations. Perhaps you've moved all the way to a voice over IP phone where you can access your calls from any place and any device. Or perhaps you're someplace in the middle so that you have a desktop phone, but you're able to access your email from any place, your voicemail from any place, that you can update your out-of-office message, and you can receive information that way. Some systems also have the opportunity to forward your messaging to voicemail. So look at what your system offers. If you're not sure of all the capabilities, this is a great time to contact your provider to find out what you have available to you. Email. Is your email hosted with a server in a closet in your office, or is it hosted somewhere in the cloud? How do people access their email? They access their email from outside of the office. Laptop or devices that you provide from your office. Next, productivity tools. I know some work with Google, but the traditional way was you got a license for a computer, you downloaded that licensed product onto your computer, and that was it. So that license for your Word and Excel and PowerPoint was all tied up to that device that you were working on. Today we have other options. We have Office 365, we have G Suite. With Office 365, each staff person is able to download the product to 5 different devices that they have access to. So they're not just limited to a home office or limited to your workplace office. They can work from many locations. How are you storing your documents? A lot of organizations still have file cabinets, and that's where the important paperwork is kept. Some organizations, each individual stores their documents on their own computer and nobody else has access to it. So sometimes we have really important spreadsheets and other devices that are being kept on people's individual computers and not being shared. More commonly today, we see shared drives so that you have a common drive where stuff gets uploaded, and maybe that then sits in a server closet in your office, or maybe it is in the cloud. How do people access that information? Well, clearly the file cabinet, you have to be on site, but for some of the other documents, you may have a VPN access into your office where you can access the information, or everything might be stored in the cloud. You might be using Box or Dropbox or Office 365 or some other solution like that to manage all of your document storage. So again, take a look at where you're at and think about where you want to be. This is something that changes when you have a remote workforce. The casual communication and problem solving that goes on in the office, and sometimes it's catching up on what you did over the weekend or where you went, and sometimes it's actually problem solving. I had this member call, they have this question, how do I solve it? And so you're conversing with your colleagues face to face. Once you move to a virtual environment, that opportunity is lost unless you implement some sort of chat or messaging software. This is what we have available to us at orgSource through the chat function in Office 365. I know a lot of organizations use Slack, which is free and available and easy to use. And there are many other options out there that we'll go through. But this is something to consider. How are we going to keep in touch when we're working? When I worked for the American Society for Surgery of the Hand, even when we were in the office, we were required to have the messaging software open at all times so that if another staff person, for example, was on the phone with a member and they had a question, they could quickly message us, we could respond, and then they can continue that conversation seamlessly. So there's applicability for the software when you're in the office as well. What do your meetings currently look like? Is everybody in person, gathered around a table conversing? Or do you have one of those conference phones where you might not be able to hear everybody well, or they may not be able to hear you, and you have some glitches? Perhaps you have video conferencing like the Zoom conference. Video conferencing is something that's become much more ubiquitous, at least in my world, in the last couple of years, and it's made a huge difference. It's so hard when you're on a conference call to see facial cues and other cues that people are showing, and to have a really good connection if you can't see people's faces. So video conferencing makes a huge difference, and especially now when so many of us are practicing social distancing, the more you can employ video conferencing, the more connected we're going to feel. How about faxes? I know some organizations have stopped using faxes altogether, but some can't. In that case, does your fax machine look like this still? Or are you able to receive and send faxes through your email? There are tools that will enable you to do that if you only have a hard fax machine like the one on the left. And then your key systems. If you're running an association, you know you have systems that are critical to your association. So your database, your association management system, your website, your financial management system, maybe manuscript submissions, abstract submissions, grant submissions. How are you managing those, and how can you access those systems? Are any of them available outside of your office, or do you have to be there in person to manage that? That's going to make a huge difference in how you can manage moving forward. In terms of project management, how are you managing your projects? So when I worked for an association and I was super busy, this is how I managed my projects often. It was in my head. What was I going to do next? What needed to happen? How things happened? A lot of it was in my head. I might share it with a coworker or two. But if something happened to me, unfortunately, somebody else would have to pick up and guess. So in more instances, people are writing things down in Excel, but are they keeping it on their own computers, or are they sharing that with other people, however they are managing their projects? There are a lot of cloud-based project management systems today. Many of them offer free services. This is a view of Rike, which is the system that we use internally at orgSource, and we know some of our clients use. It has a lot of functionality, and anybody can access the project from anywhere. Once you look at what you have available through your office, look at what your staff has available at home. So for example, if you don't have enough laptops for people to take home, perhaps they have laptops at home. That said, what does their laptop look like? If it's one of these, you're probably not going to want to use it. But if they're more up-to-date, if they have more up-to-date hardware, or even if it's a desktop, you might consider how they might be able to use that in the short term to be able to connect to their work. The other thing I'm going to point out is this laptop here has a wired connection to the modem. My new laptop doesn't have a place for a wire. So the other thing you're going to want to consider is wireless access. What sort of access do people have? Can they only be wired in, or do they have internet, high-speed internet access in their home? And then finally, do they have a phone? Do they have a mobile phone that they can use to take calls, to receive calls that are forwarded to? Many people do, but I know not everyone does. So it's good to know. So basically, the biggest thing that we're talking about when it comes to virtual work is making sure that we are redundant and we're able to share the information easily and throughout the organization. And so when we're looking at where we are today and where we want to be, we want to make sure that we're able to do this sharing. So let's talk about your gap analysis. You've done your analysis, you've inventoried everything that you have, you understand where you're at, and you understand where you want to go. But is it going to cost a ton of money? Maybe, maybe not. So I'm hoping when we come away from this presentation today, you'll have some ideas for some free and low-cost tools that you can implement quickly and easily. You'll also consider the value of the investment today versus your long-term growth. If you're nowhere near ready for working remotely, clearly the world is changing quickly, and you'll need to assess if you're able to make some adjustments sooner rather than later. You'll also have to look at what tasks are we doing that are essential and which are tasks that we're doing because we've always done it this way. For example, are you saving copies, hard paper copies of registrations in a file cabinet? So somebody has to be in the office to do that. Or can you do it differently now? Are people submitting CME claims or continuing education claims on paper that are faxed to you or mailed? Or can you do it differently? And so our final advice is always do what you can now and then plan now for what you can do later. Really, when you think about it, these are the minimum requirements for remote work. You have to be able to access the internet at a decent speed connection. You need a phone to communicate. And sometimes you don't even need that if you have voice over IP on your computer. And then a headset really makes a difference. You don't have to have it. This one I have pictured here is the one I'm using, and it generally provides a pretty clear sound, and it also blocks out some noise so it's easier to concentrate. So when you're looking at working at home, so do all of your jobs have to be done in your office right now, or only some? And if it's only some, what can you do to enable those other people to work at home? In light of the social distancing that we've been advised to undertake, as many employees as you can move out of your office now is going to be better for all of us. And if you need to have some working in the office, perhaps you need to adjust some of your spacing. So perhaps people shouldn't be working right next to each other. You might need to readjust where they're working from. And maybe you need to adjust their work schedule. I know some organizations have put long plans into place on how to combat germs in the office and all that other stuff. That's probably the topic of another webinar. But just for the mere essentials today, think about how you can do distancing in the office. And then think about what do you need to do today to get your remote workers ready. So here are some tools and options that we've come up with. Your staff person is working at home. They don't have a high-speed internet connection. They can get one installed, but that takes some time. Do they have a hotspot on their phone? You can't use your phone and your hotspot simultaneously, but depending on their plan, they may be able to use that hotspot to connect. And it might just be for short periods of time to upload information, to access information. But if you're really in a pinch and you need to get people at home now, this is a tool that you can use. Of course, staff can contract with a local provider, a phone or cable provider, to have internet installed in their home. There's often a time delay between the purchase and the installation. In that case, you might want to consider purchasing a hotspot or having staff purchase a hotspot through their wireless or cell phone provider, or you can provide a hotspot. So this is one I just learned about called Mobile Beacon for a really affordable price of $120 for 12 months of unlimited service. Nonprofits that qualify, so they have to be 501c3 organizations, can purchase this device and then equip staff to take this home and use that as a way to connect. Each hotspot can use to be connected up to 10 commuters, smartphones, and tablets. So when we're in a place where we can have face-to-face meetings again, this is something you can take with you and use in a staff office or enable other connections when you're meeting. You want to visit the Mobile Beacon site or TechSoup for more information. And long term, you might want to consider, does internet access at home become a requirement to work for your organization? Laptop computers. If your staff don't have laptops, what specifications do you need for your laptops? How are you going to acquire them? Who will set them up? Hopefully you have an IT vendor already that can help you with this, but those are things you're going to want to take into consideration. TechSoup has refurbished hardware with low-cost, high-quality laptops. I saw some yesterday that you can get for just a few $100s through their plan. Again, you have to be a 501c3, but that's an option. Long-term, are you going to use these laptops to replace the desktop computers in your office? And if you are, think about your infrastructure. Is your infrastructure currently hardwired versus wireless? And again, some laptops today are going to work for wireless, and so you're going to want to make sure that whatever you purchase is going to work with your infrastructure unless you're ready to change that out. Phones. So can your work phones be forwarded to personal phones? Can people access their voicemail? Can they access their voicemail through email? Check with your phone provider. And then make a schedule to require staff to check their voicemail and respond to calls regularly, and define what regular means. If you have voice over IP, you're all set. And if you don't, you might want to consider that long term. Email. Is it possible to enable cloud-based access to your current email system if you don't have that already? And if not, there are a couple of cloud-based email options, G Suite, Microsoft Office 365, and again, you can get reduced pricing for qualified nonprofits. There are other options available too, and you'll want to talk to a technology vendor for that. Document management. Do you have an internal drive that can be accessed remotely, like through VPN? And if not, can that be enabled? There are options for cloud-based document management. Office 365, G Suite with Google, Box, Dropbox. So short term, you want to make sure you have a way to share the files. Long term, you probably want to make a plan to migrate all your existing files to the cloud or to a place where they can be accessible through the cloud, perhaps through a VPN. And you want to update your document management policy to deal with both your electronic files and your paper files. You may even want to scan in some of those paper files that are essential so you have them available from any place, especially insurance policies and other critical information. I've talked a little bit about instant messaging and being able to collaborate quickly and easily with other staff. Long term, you might want to consider some other options for that. Meeting tools. Does your current phone provider provide video conferencing services? They might. If not, you have many options. Zoom is what we're on today. They do have a free option. You can have up to a 40-minute call with up to 100 participants. I know some people who use that. After 40 minutes, they disconnect and they set up another Zoom link and start again. There are Google Hangouts, Skype through Office Teams or on its own, FaceTime. Whatever you decide, though, provide training for your staff. That's going to be critical for this and all the tools that you're using. And long term, and maybe not so long term, you might want to consider video conferencing with your boards and committees. It makes a huge difference. Project management tracking, these are some of the tools that are available. And I'm going a little quicker now because we're getting closer to our 30-minute mark. But again, there are many free tools available to you. For systems that are hosted in your office, if your system is not set up to allow for remote access and it can't, you clearly need a long-term solution. So in that case, you're going to have to figure out how staff can come to your office, and you're going to want to contact your vendor to determine what is going to be necessary to move to the cloud. That's a good time to determine if your current platform is working for you or not. If you need to find a new one, you're going to need to develop a budget, timeline, and strategy. And I know in these uncertain economic times, you may not be able to tackle this today, but this is something you definitely need to start thinking about. And again, staff training. Zoom and other video conferencing tools are great for staff training. One of our clients has somebody on staff who became their trainer. And for every new technology they rolled out, she developed videos on how to do essential tasks. She used Zoom, she recorded it, she shared that, and then staff can access that at any time. So here are quick tips for working at home. So if you're a manager, decide what your schedules are going to be. Are you going to have everybody work the same or similar hours, or can they work asynchronously? That would allow people who have family members at home to get the work done. Going back to my mom, she worked when we were in bed. If you can allow that, that's a great way to enable workers who might be meeting some challenges. Or you might want to set up a combination. Set sometimes when everyone's required to be available, and set sometimes when people can work on their own. Having people keep their personal calendars up to date and a way to access those calendars is critical to that. What are your customer service expectations? How quickly do people have to return phone calls and emails? And what are your meeting expectations? If you're going to use video, is it preferred? Is it required? And then in terms of management, how are you going to manage your employees remotely? If this is something new to you, there are the task tracking tools. You can always pick up the phone call, get on a call with somebody, and you can do personal messaging. And if it's your first time working at home, these are some things to think about. Create a dedicated space for working. That's where you're going to have your tools. Block your time. Work in short increments. This is a great suggestion. I'm not so good at it. Sometimes I'll find I've been sitting for 4 hours, but your body will thank you if you get up and move around every so often. If you're really focusing on something, put your phone on Do Not Disturb for a period of time. We know this works in the office as well. Scheduling. Calendarize your to-do list. Schedule it all, block out your time, schedule breaks, make sure you eat. Again, I admit to being not so great at this, but it's a good thing to do to keep everybody healthy. If you have kids at home, make sure you have clear guidelines. Put a sign on the door if you have a door that closes to say, Dad working. Close the door, close the blinds to the outside. If you have dogs, and I do, as much as you can, move them to a separate space so they're not interrupting your calls. And then for video calls, we have some tips here on how to be engaged during those calls and to be mindful of what others might find distracting during a video call. Resources. So I've suggested that you're going to want to get in contact with your current vendors, first of all. Those vendors who support your network and your equipment are going to be the best ones to help you initially. See what they advise and work with them. In terms of resources of 501c3 nonprofits, if you're not aware of TechSoup, now you are. So TechSoup will certify 501c3 nonprofits and make you eligible for all sorts of discounts. And so if you go to Google for Google Suite or Office for Office 365, even if you start on their site, they're going to send you over to TechSoup to become certified as a nonprofit. And then once they get that certification from TechSoup, then they'll be able to provide you with that software. In other cases, you purchase the software through TechSoup and then get it through the other vendor. So there's the website for TechSoup, and then we'll share this PDF. We have a link on how to get to the TechSoup resources for remote work during this time. orgSource works with Nonprofit Geeks and Michael Knight. He is a Microsoft partner. He's an expert on moving organizations to cloud-based Microsoft solutions. He's been super busy this week, so if this is something you want to do, I recommend reaching out to him sooner than later. But we know Michael, and he will do what he can to help you as soon as he can. And then there's orgSource. We provide short-term and long-term digital strategy plans. You know, in best case scenarios, when somebody says they want to move to a remote work environment, we have months and years to work with them. This time we know that the situation is a little different, so we can help you come up with short-term strategies if need be. We can do assessments, analysis, recommendations. We can provide trainings, project oversight, help you with staffing gaps, and much, much more. So if you want to work with us, feel free to reach out to Sherry, or if you know Kevin or me or anybody else on the orgSource team, let us know. We'd be happy to work with you. So at this point, we want to open this to questions. If you have any questions, please use the chat feature in Zoom, and we will try to answer what we can. Thank you for joining us, and I'd also like to mention that after this presentation, I have put together an appendix with some of those assessment questions that I went through so that you could go through that with your staff or on your own and just kind of check off where you land in the spectrum of traditional workforce versus the remote workforce. So we've had a request to share the TechSoup slide. Their website is techsoup.org.
Great, thanks, Don. This is Kevin. So as people get their questions going, another tip when you are using chat or Slack or one of these things to communicate with your team members, it's also very helpful to put on your status. For example, in a meeting or on a call or unavailable, or you are available. That also helps your colleagues know that you can actually be available to them through chat. So again, just another tip that we try to use internally as well as some of our external clients as well. And then there was another request about the project management tool slide, Dawn.
Yep, I've shared that. Are you able to see it?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, good. I'll go back to it right here.
Yeah, and just a reminder, as everyone's still on here, is that you will get a copy of this presentation as well as a link to the recording, so you'll have that information. So we'll be holding these types of webinars in the coming weeks, and there might be some other topics. For example, people might be interested in the security around working remote, as everyone uses either their personal laptops to connect to corporate networks. Another topic might be the HR implications of working from home, especially if you're going to require folks to get internet access or transfer calls to their cell phones, whatever the case may be. So we're always looking for those types of topics, and so those are just examples of topics to come.
We have received one recommendation from one of our participants. Their office can work remotely, but they're finding that there's a gap, particularly in finance. So the recommendation is to see this as a priority area for assessing your effort to work at home so that you can address that. Thank you for that recommendation.
Yes. I know sometimes working remotely, especially in the finance area, people hesitate, especially when you're thinking about AP and cutting checks. But there's also online tools to help you with that, like Bill.com, for example. The other tip I'll leave is if you're going to do G Suite or Microsoft, you should definitely enable multi-factor authentication, or MFA. For those of you who have that now with Google or even your own bank, if the system senses a login from a different device or something like that, it'll send you a code to your cell phone just to ensure that you're being authenticated. So it's just a multi-factor authentication. Certainly Microsoft Office has that, Google has that, so we highly recommend that you turn that on.
We have another tip from a participant on a tool for breaking up your workday, Tomato Timer, or Tomato Timer, spelled just like it sounds, tomatotimer.com. Thank you.
Good one.
And a tip to establish a 30-minute daily checkpoint with staff at different times. So checking in with your staff, seeing how they're doing, what support they might need, and especially if you're expecting staff to work at certain times, good idea to check in on them and connect with them at that time.
Great, thanks. Well, if there's no other questions, hold on, we got someone. Okay, there's a question about cutting checks and receiving faxes to the lockbox and passing the IMS batches from department to department and issue refunds is a problem, or all problems in finance. Yes, it certainly is. There are, I guess, digital workflows from updated financial or accounting packages that can also be implemented for that approval process, and especially when you're doing refunds. Because I know there's probably several organizations now who are probably doing refunds from recently canceled meetings. Well, great, everyone. Dawn, thank you very much. That was fantastic. Again.